You're watching the press preview, our first look at the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour or so, we'll be taking a look at what's making the headlines with the editor of the Cumberland and Westmorland Herald, Emily Atherton, and the editor of Politico's London Playbook, Alex Wickham. But before we do, let's take you through the front pages that we have. And of course, one story is dominating. The Daily Mail says the PM is on the ropes from the combination of an alleged comment about bodies being piled high, funding for number 10 decorations, and a leak inquiry. The allegations of sleaze are tainting the Prime Minister, according to the Eye. A slurry of sleaze is the Metro's take on the story, thanks in part to the photo there. The Telegraph says that Boris Johnson is fighting to move on from the row, pictured again in a farmyard. The Guardian leading with the headline, pressure on Johnson after claim of slur on COVID death. The Mirror responds to the alleged comment with its headline, not just bodies, Boris, we love them. The Star, in typical Star fashion, also weighing in. As does The Sun, it's reporting that Boris Johnson says the claims against him are, simply put, lies. Similar sentiment repeated in the Express. Meanwhile, The Times has more claims about Boris Johnson's comments. The headline, Johnson said he would let COVID rip in a lockdown row. And questions remain for the former Prime Minister David Cameron, the FT leading on revelations that the financier Lex Greensill was a number 10 advisor, but one with no contract or indeed set job role. As you can see, we are joined tonight by Emily Atherton and Alex Wickham. Guys, lovely to see you both. And Emily, let's start with you, shall we? It is always fortuitous when interesting political stories happen in elections because you get to see the protagonist dressing up in all manner of silly outfits. On the front of the Metro, it's Boris Johnson in wellies. The headline, slurry of sleaze.
Absolutely. This is the Metro. I've got a picture of Boris Johnson visiting a farm in Wales. They've captured him in a cattle shed and headed it slurry of sleaze. This piece is by Dominic Yateman, and it basically delves into the tsunami of sleaze allegations that are currently engulfing the PM. Everything from the chatty rat claims and counterclaims that are involving Dominic Cummings, the costs on flat refurbishment at number 10, well, number 11 Downing Street, and of course the Greensill, David Cameron lobbying allegations that are being made. It lends itself very well, the photo, to the subject at hand, I suppose. It's the sort of, I can only describe it as a tsunami. They've put a rather cheeky caption on the photo there, which I won't repeat.
Yeah, good, because I've just seen it, so please don't do that. I mean, Alex, I have to admit, I am slightly surprised that the papers are still choosing to lead on those alleged comments rather than necessarily developments that are taking place on around the flat. We still, of course, don't have it on the Register of Ministers' Interests. But if you take a look at the Eye, the key question in all of this is whether any of it is actually, hitting home with the voters. Some polling suggesting that it might, but of course, lots of people have already voted by post.
Yeah, this is, I suppose, the only question that really matters. At the moment, we've got the Prime Minister, we've got some former special advisors, we've got some journalists in Westminster having a big row about some wallpaper, some WhatsApp messages, and it's all a little bit inside baseball. The thing that really matters is what the voters think, always. And, at the moment, the sort of perceived wisdom in Westminster is that this hasn't really cut through to the general public. We've got the local elections in 10 days' time, I think, and, the general view in Westminster is that whenever allegations of sleaze and this sort of mud is slung around, the voters kind of think, oh, well, all politicians are awful, all politicians are up to their necks in it. It doesn't really make a difference one way or the other. Well, this poll on the front page of the Eye, it's an interesting poll from Redfield and Wilson Strategies, which has found that half of voters do now think that this is a Tory government mired in sleaze, which is the first real sign that we've really had that actually people do have a bit of a problem with this. They are getting a bit concerned about the stories that they've been reading in the papers over the last couple of weeks, whether it is the flat, whether it is the the chatty rat story, whether it is advisors working for people that they shouldn't, officials working for people that they shouldn't on the side, all of these sort of things that have just snowballed into a bit of a narrative. And certainly if you speak to the Labour Party, they really do think that there is something going on here. They really do think that this is something that they can pursue, not necessarily one that might deliver them a huge victory at the upcoming local elections. This isn't necessarily something that changes the way people think overnight. And obviously the Tories still do have a pretty healthy lead in most polls at the moment. But if they just keep a sort of an attritional sort of war of deluge, as we were talking about earlier, of these sleaze allegations, eventually building it up over months and months and years, as we've found with governments in the past, that could become a real serious problem for Boris Johnson down the line.
Emily, take us to the front page of the Financial Times. In this story, again, whether or not it cuts through outside SW1P is a different matter, but it is still gobsmacking. Lex Greensill, working in Downing Street, having a security pass, apparently no contract. And this information reaches us from none other than the UK's most senior civil servant, who can't even get to the bottom of the story.
That's right. Simon Case giving evidence today to a committee of MPs at Westminster. I think perhaps people hoped more would come out of this by way of information, but what's come out's come out. And he said he was alarmed at the way things played out with the appointment of Lex Greensill, as you say, without a contract, no real job description. The evidence that he's giving there to the Public Administration Committee, he was working for, this committee's also heard today that civil servants were working for outside bodies. This apparently is quite common practice while still employed in the public sector. Double hatting, as it's known, where people, conflict of interest is certainly an issue there, isn't it? This is now going to be the subject of another inquiry. It's all centring around the Greensill affair, the lobbying, the fact that senior civil servants were employed at Greensill during a period that they were still on the government payroll. So, as I say, this sort of double hatting is now to become the subject of another inquiry. I think today's evidence from Simon Case, people in the know, I think, will have been watching that with interest, hoping that more would have come out. He was certainly questioned during that about the chatty rat scenario and the flat refurbishment. Where the money came from.
Sure. I just want to bring an Alex as well on this, just because we're just running out of time before we head to the break. But let's just pause for a second and consider that which the head of the civil service did not know. He didn't know, Alex, how many people were double hatting. He had to ask them. Doesn't know, couldn't explain exactly how the Downing Street flat was paid for. The leak inquiries are still ongoing, but doesn't look like there's any chance of success. I mean, he's not covering himself in glory, the head of the UK civil service, is he?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, this story is not going away. And if Simon Case thinks if Simon Case is patting himself on the back tonight thinking, well, I got away with that one, I didn't manage to give anything away, I think he's got another thing coming. People I'm hearing tonight within government as well as across Westminster are pretty unimpressed with this performance by Simon Case. He's asking the Select Committee, who he has to tell the truth to, by the way, and even more so as the highest public official in the land, the highest civil servant in the land. He's asking them to believe the number 10 flat. Does he know any of the details about the renovations? No, he doesn't know any of it. The chatty rat, the leak inquiry that's been going on for probably about 4 or 5 months now. Does he know where we're getting with that? Does he know any idea how close that is to conclusion or where that's headed? No, he can't say anything about it. No idea. And again, with most extraordinarily on these Lex Greensill allegations, the revelation that this financier was working for David Cameron with a security pass with no contract in Downing Street while also working as a financier. no answers on that. No idea, Simon Case said he had, about how and why this arrangement was happening. And I just think that just wash. He's going to have to do a lot better, and this story is not going to go away.
And Alex, let's go inside the Metro, shall we? In a story which perhaps I think the West have been slightly slow to catch up with, but everyone is there and there in numbers and reporting on it, which is great. The situation in India is a catastrophe by any measure.
Yeah, and it puts it all into perspective, really, doesn't it? Westminster is being consumed with this sort of navel-gazing stuff, as important as it is on Tory alleged sleaze. But what we've seen, really illustrated quite shockingly by the Metro here, is just the extent of the crisis in India. 350,000 cases in a single day, 2,500 deaths. But the reality is that in a country of 1 billion people, obviously the testing is not getting everyone, and the numbers are just clearly not possible to even fathom, and the real numbers are going to be much higher than that. It is just a horrendous scale. We've seen this week, Britain sent 600 ventilators, it announced yesterday, to India to try and help, and oxygen concentrator machines as well, which is obviously a really good thing. You do think that. You do wonder if perhaps politicians in Westminster had stopped focusing perhaps a little bit on some of this relatively unimportant stuff that's been going on in Parliament at the moment, and been thinking about what is going on. Perhaps this could have happened slightly sooner. The next thing is going to be vaccines as well, which is going to be the huge argument. Is obviously Britain's numbers have come right down, in part due to the lockdown, but also in large part due to the vaccine. How on earth do you get hundreds of millions of vaccines over to India in a very short amount of time to try and save this country from an appalling outcome?
I mean, Emily, I suppose, as the FT kind of suggests, I mean, the only way that we are going to stop the catastrophe continuing, I should say, is for the world to come together. Donations of vaccines are going to be all important. But of course, there is a domestic political angle to any country that chooses to export vaccine surplus or vaccine stock in favour of giving it to their own citizens.
Yeah, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, is being criticised internationally, I think, for allowing the vaccine manufacturers to sort of set their own prices. I mean, I was struck by the sort of powerful images in both the Metro and FT of really the suffering that people are going through. The Metro focuses on a woman laid out in the back of a car receiving oxygen outside a temple. There's a sort of self-help element to all this that is having to come into play, which, it beggars belief, really, that people are having to almost beg and plead to get the oxygen that they need. As Alex says, the key thing here is going to be vaccines, isn't it? And the argument's been made, hasn't it, that we're, rolling down the age groups here in the UK to age groups that are arguably less at risk of bad outcomes, when in countries such as India, the vulnerable age groups are not actually getting access to vaccines, and it's something's got to be done about that. The US is weighing in with more medical equipment, but that's fighting fire. We really need to, what really needs to happen is that you've got to cut off those infections at source, haven't you, with rolling out some vaccines.